Welcome. My name is Bruce Ward, and I'll be emceeing today's presentation for CMMC Readiness for Manufacturers. CMMC is a standard that Joe will Joe, our speaker, will discuss, but a lot of organizations kind of know us as technology deployment organization, including a lot of design and support. And CMMC is really something that's going to drive some of that technology deployment for securing assets. So what we bring to the table here is some training and certification. We bring some experience in conducting pre-assessments. And our intention today is to provide you some education around how to get prepared for the CMMC certification standard that you're going to need. So with that, I'd like to introduce my partner in crime over here, Joe Guarini, who is going to take us from there. If there are any questions along the way, and you'll see me pop into the Q&A panel, you certainly can use the chat or questions tab on the right. We'll try to address questions either along the way or ask them at designated periods throughout the presentation. But without further ado, our goal is to be an advisor. And Joe, let me get you introduced and get started on the presentation.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar on the subject of CMMC Readiness for Manufacturers. So, as Bruce said, I'm Joe Guarini, a project manager with Peters & Associates. I'm also one of about 1,800 registered practitioners in CMMC. That just means I've received the training required to provide accurate guidance in this field and to help others understand all that's involved with CMMC. So, I'm excited to get going and to help to explain these details. Having said that, let's begin and look at our agenda. So we see here with our list, we'll be starting with CMMC, diving into also what the interim rule is, looking at that, and considering some important statistics related to CMMC to understand the need and also some things to look out for. And since CMMC has been in the news for quite a while and people have been looking at it for a good bit, there's been some lessons learned that have come out of that. So we'll be considering some things that I would call as myths or perhaps some lies regarding CMMC that we can bust. And then also consider the implementation timeline. What does that implementation for certification look like? And then also what that roadmap to compliance looks like, especially considering the different tools that are available. One specifically we'll look at today, and then what next steps would be to get ready down that path. All right, so okay, what is CMMC? That's a great place to start. You know, it's been in the news, more and more people are talking about it. Let's start with the acronym. CMMC stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. CMMC is a framework that builds off existing Department of Defense cybersecurity frameworks that have already been out there for a while, like NIST 800-171, FAR 52.204, and it's intended to standardize cybersecurity practices for a purpose, to better protect information exchanged with the Department of Defense, the DoD. So why is this being implemented now? What was wrong with how things were before? Well, CMMC is intended to further secure the DoD supply chain by instilling a higher degree of accountability, which is needed more than ever because that threat landscape just is not getting any smaller. Over the years, some exploited information may seem like completely unimportant data to the average Joe, perhaps, but let's say there's a government contract for boots, okay, to be provided to a certain part of the world. At face value, they may seem like pretty harmless information. However, if that information falls into the wrong hands, they could determine where increased military presence could be headed, and that would be a big problem. So CMMC, all that is to say, it's intended to protect information, no doubt, but also bigger than that, it's about protecting our nation and the integrity of its data. More and more often, it gets into the news how foreign nations suddenly have machinery and technology that looks and behaves strangely similar to our domestic products, and a lot of the time it's from malicious parties on the outside looking in, put things together, seeing our plans, and boom, they've got their blueprints for the same product based off of what they stole. Security shortcomings with DoD contractors have been noticed over the years, which has allowed for a larger influx of attacks. So cyber attackers are also getting smarter over time by being more specific with their targets. learning like who does business with the DoD, and also they don't care how big the company is. It could be a gigantic, company that does business with the DoD, or even a small, sardine in the big fish land, right? So one statistic the DoD released indicated that about $60 billion worth of data is lost every year from this type of data robbery. So that's pretty interesting. We can consider some statistics together here, which I think are interesting. 34% of all documented cyber attacks targeted manufacturers. So more than a third. Small businesses are the target of 43% of cyber attacks, and 3 out of 4 small to medium-sized businesses say they don't have sufficient personnel to address IT security. So these are some pretty revealing statistics when considering how important CMMC certification is for every business size, not just for the monsters. In fact, it's also been reported that cybercrime is up 600% since the pandemic started. I think 45% of Americans have reported that their personal information has been compromised by a data breach in the last 5 years. So that's almost half. 40% of small businesses have experienced 8 or more hours of downtime due to a cyber breach. And I'll just throw one more stat out there for you. 55% of ransomware attacks now involve companies with fewer than 100 employees. So the government certainly sees all this and understands the need for the bar to be raised. So now, since CMMC has come along as a new cybersecurity framework, the DoD is going to require anyone who wants to contract with them to have a CMMC certification. Some DoD contracts are already setting that requirement this year. You may already know that. So who does CMMC pertain to? Really, anyone who is in the DoD supply chain. Whether you contract with the DoD to provide office supplies, or if it's on the more technical end, or if it's maybe possibly key equipment for military weapons guidance systems, you need the certification on both ends of that spectrum. So Lockheed Martin needs it, and so does that mom and pop shop, that tool and die company that makes just a single type of spring that's a part of a larger prime contract. And side note, prime contractors are large organizations that distribute smaller contracting work to smaller organizations, subcontractors. The DoD supply chain includes over, I think, at this point, over 300,000 companies. So CMMC is going to be a hot topic for quite a while. In the center there in the slide, you'll see the term interim rule. So what's that? The interim was there before CMMC was. Let me rephrase that. The DFARS, which is what it's based off of, has been around for a while. The interim rule came along with CMMC. DFARS, by the way, stands for Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. It's the terms and conditions that go along with defense contracts. So there are DFARS requirements that contractors have been required to comply with for a very long time. However, until CMMC is fully implemented, there is now this interim rule, which is defined by DFARS. It's like subpart 204.75 if you want to look that up. But what it's doing is it's requiring contractors to determine a security score based on not only the regular DFARS compliance requirements, but also this new CMMC framework. So now these organizations are able to choose to self-assess themselves, and that's fine. And the company that has fully implemented all 110 of these NIST 800, 171 security requirements would receive a score of 110 to report to the DoD's Supplier Performance Risk System, it's called, the SPRS. So they can self-assess and they have to report a score. And here's how that scoring system works. You would start with a perfect score of 110, and then for requirements missed, that score would go down. Some requirements are worth 1 point, some are worth 3, some are worth 5 points each. So that score drops pretty fast as the number of compliance requirements missed increases. Whatever that final score is, that is to be submitted to that SPRS DoD system within 30 days of your self-assessment, where it is said that there's potentially heightened discretion or scrutiny applied to potential contractors with lower scores. It's also required that they're to report if there's a security incident with that scored organization within 72 hours. So now all of this applies to organizations that are required to be DFARS compliant. However, regardless of all of that, if there's any contract that says that it requires a CMMC level, that means a CMMC certification is absolutely required in order to participate in that contract, no exceptions. So even if you are DFARS compliant, even with those new interim rule compliances in place, CMMC is still the new coming standard, and people have to make way for that. So let's talk about laws, rules, and frameworks and what the difference is between these, because with all these different acronyms and all these different terms and organizations, we need to get this straight. It's important. Not exactly fun, but it is very necessary. Not a lot of people understand the differences between these, but now you can be one of those who do get it if you don't already. So laws are passed by governments, right? HIPAA, high-tech, these were all acts of Congress to protect health information. Those were laws. And then there's rules. The rules were put in place by agencies or organizations, but they aren't laws, right? So HIPAA is a law, but then PCI and DFARS, those are just rules, right? They're essentially requirements. And the way to meet those requirements is by implementing frameworks, okay? To meet PCI and HIPAA requirements, you implement the NIST CSF framework. To meet the DFARS requirements, you implement the NIST 800-171 framework, etc. And by the way, when you see NIST there at the bottom of the slide, that acronym refers to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they're a federal agency with the Department of Commerce, and they just provide guidance, in case you were wondering. So when we talk about CMMC, we're not talking about the law. We're talking about a cybersecurity framework. Now, although CMMC isn't the law, there is something called the False Claims Act, which can involve the law. Now, I don't know if you've looked at the False Claims Act in any depth, but reading about it is mighty sobering, very sobering. Like, I think it raised my eyebrows more than a few times, no doubt. In falsifying evidence, if that ever happens, or if people, organizations misrepresent compliance information, it can result in some serious consequences, including being sued for breach of contract or potentially being banned from all future contracts. Financial damages, it's been said, can be up to 3 times the value of the contract, plus a penalty of, I think, $11,000 per claim. So it gets pretty steep. I think it's been recorded that the Department of Justice obtained more than $3 billion in settlements and judgments due to false claims in just the 2019 fiscal year alone. On top of all of that, whistleblowers get a benefit. If there's a whistleblower and lets people know what's going on in their own organization, they can get between 15% and 30% of the award. So being honest about where you're at is in everyone's best interest, absolutely. This year, there are 15 contracts that are requiring contractors to have at least a CMMC Level 1 certification to be eligible to be awarded the contract. I believe they were aiming for 15 contracts this year, but I think it might be closer to 7, just because the CMMC assessments started later than everyone thought. But regardless of that, you can see on this chart, it is a relatively slow ramp up, but starting in 2022, it starts to get way up there, right? So 2022, 75 contracts will require some level of CMMC certification. In 2023, there will be 250 contracts requiring a cert. In 2024, 325 contracts, and then when it's fully rolled out and implemented in the year 2025, it's anticipated that all the 475 contracts will all require some level of CMMC certification. So although it may seem like a slow ramp up to some, however, it could take organizations years to get up to level 5 potentially with all the security controls involved. But it is interesting to know the rollout. Not every contract will be requiring this cert right off the bat. I wanted to show this slide as well. It looks messy, but essentially all this is communicating is that CMMC isn't a new set of compliance controls. CMMC has 5 levels, yes, but depending on what type of data relates to a DoD contract, if it's more sensitive, it's going to require a higher certification level. When we look at all the requirements for level 5, the highest level, we see that it adopts controls from several different existing frameworks that have already been out there for a while. In the light gray oval, the biggest one, we see it overlap with 7 different ovals, right? So if you've implemented NIST 800-53, guess what? You've already addressed every domain of the highest level of CMMC. Great. But this set of overlapping ovals, it's intended to show how CMMC is not reinventing any wheels here, but it's selecting important elements from several different areas to create their own framework, tailored specifically for contract data protection. Okay, so we're not going to go through every single little piece of this slide, but it's meant to indicate that there are levels with CMMC, okay? And you'll see there's terms like practices on this slide, also known as controls. Those are just the individual requirements involved with each maturity level. That's what that means. So it's interesting, I wanted to note this, that there are going to be no contracts that will require a level 2 certification. Level 2 is created in order for organizations to show their progress toward level 3 from level 1. Since level 3 is such a noticeable jump in effort and requirements from level 1, not only are there more controls involved, there's also process requirements that become involved, so forth. Level 1 has 17 requirements, and none of them technically need to be documented. If they aren't documented, then they need to be demonstrated to an auditor in order to show evidence, and that is acceptable for level 1. Starting with level 2, there are 2 processes that are required, in addition to the 17 technical controls and the things that are added from level 1. And level 3 adds another process and all those other controls, and they all have to be documented. So in addition to live demonstrations being acceptable as well. But live demonstrations, starting with level 2 and level 3, are not sufficient by themselves. Documentation is needed.
So Joe, just let me just ask a question, just for the audience might be thinking it is, in terms of practices, you know, even at level 1, and I think you're going to go through some examples later, but might that be something like implementation of multi-factor authentication for, you know, for authentication from remote, or from, you know, for administrators, or in general for all organizations when accessing that data that might be under CMMC protection?
Exactly right. Yeah, level 1 starts with some of the most foundational, what I would call foundational aspects of IT, which would include multi-factor authentication. That's correct.
Okay. And it looks like it jumps up pretty dramatically from level 1 at 17 to 72 to 130, you know, and keeps going up from there. But level 1, as you mentioned, is foundational. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, once you start getting towards level 5, then you need log correlation engines. You know, how fast can you find logs in the event of an incident, you know, in a quick enough amount of time, and who's looking at it, and what's the process look like, and is that process documented? Is there proof of historical exercisings of that process, and when did that happen, and where is that stored, and is that storage protected and behind authentication, and so forth. So it gets more and more stringent the higher level you go. The vast majority of contracts to begin are all going to be starting with level 1. Great. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I like to show this little slide here. I mean, you see how the first person is saying hello, second person, words get a little bit off, and then by the end, the person doesn't even know what's happening. The telephone game, right? So I have seen personally, just researching CMMC, that sometimes things get a little bit off. You can tell where the copying and pasting didn't necessarily copy over the logic with it. And so I wanted to expose some misinformation regarding CMMC to help educate folks. All right, so this first one here, I don't need CMMC since I'm already NIST 800.171 compliant. Well, So the technical requirements of NIST 800.171 are exactly the same as CMMC Level 3's. It turns out that Level 3 has more to it, which NIST 800.171 doesn't cover, such as 3 additional security domains or categories being covered. CMMC was specifically designed to include additional requirements to protect DoD supply chains, not to mention that CMMC certifications require also a third party to conduct the audit, where with the DFARS compliance with the interim rule, you can self-assess. So there is a difference. Second statement here, I have to be at CMMC Level 3 to participate in Level 3 contracts. Most times, yes. Interestingly, this is not always necessarily true, and I'll explain. Organizations with a Level 1 certification can participate in a contract that requires a Level 3 or higher maturity level if that Level 1 organization is a subcontractor with another organization that is at a Level 3 or higher. A Level 3 organization could store the DoD contract-related data for that subcontractor Level 1 organization for the duration of the contract and provide view-only access to that Level 1 org until the work is done, and then remove that access when that contract is done. So I wanted to throw that out there. Statement number 3, I must be certified at the required CMMC level to bid on a contract. Well, this is not necessarily true either. Now, organizations must be at the required maturity level at the time of the contract award date, but not at the time of the RFP or RFI. It doesn't leave a whole lot of time if an organization only starts to get ready with the certification prep until they see the contract requirements, of course. But if an organization thinks that they're close to getting their certification, they can still bid. Okay? Just a few more. This one says, we can just use technology to meet the CMMC requirements. Well, while technology can help with certification prep, software alone will not put your company in compliance with CMMC. CMMC goes beyond just addressing IT security technical requirements. For example, there are practices and processes around physical security, personnel security, and even employee awareness and training. So technology can help support compliance efforts, but achieving a maturity level will require both tools and your team. Another one here is documentation of compliance is sufficient for certification. Well, when a CMMC auditor arrives, there's a lot more to it than just handing them the attestation of compliance document, okay? The attestation of compliance document you could have, but we'll discuss a little bit later the kinds of things an auditor is looking for, but it certainly goes beyond documentation, okay? The last one I'll bring up here is CMMC certification is not worth the investment. Well, my answer to that statement is that organizations who wish to do business with the DoD, they have no choice, but at the same time, you know, having that contracted awarded, I mean, that is your business, right? The CMMC framework happens to be a fabulous idea on top of that, as it protects our nation's information and keeps the supply chain security where it needs to be, in addition to keeping your own organization secure. This picture has been around for a while. I like it. The stool slide showing the compliance at the top, and it's supposed to symbolize that if any one of those legs is removed, that stool tips over, right? So you need all 3 at the bottom there, evidence, policies, and procedures for compliance to float. So if you have documentation, guess what? You have evidence. Whether the documentation is developed manually or if you use a tool like the one I'll discuss a little bit later, it's evidence that provides value. For each control, 2 pieces of evidence are required, okay? Although an interview question can serve as 1 piece of evidence with an auditor. A policy is a statement that an organization needs to do something that's written and detailed within a procedure. For CMMC Level 1, no policies are in scope, just procedures. Starting with Level 2 and beyond, more and more written policies are required. During a compliance audit, The assessor is going to confirm that the procedures you have for things like terminating user accounts when an employee leaves the company and adding endpoints to a managed antivirus tool, that those procedures are routine and that they're a part of your company's culture. The intention is to show that your security controls are not something new that you're just trying to slap together and get used to right on the fly. The assessor is going to look to see if your security practices are a part of your everyday work life, your culture. And that's the ideal scenario too, right, for your business. You know, that's that we're performing these best effort security practices even when no one's looking. Okay. Although the slide looks a little busy, you know, I'll explain this, but even before we get there, you're going to see a lot of acronyms on this page, and I want to explain and define some of those just so we're all talking the same language. So let's talk about the CMMC-AB. Essentially, the DoD didn't want to be the regulatory body for this security framework that they wanted, okay? They wanted a third-party entity to provide the certifications and conduct the audits to keep things objective, separate, and fair. So the CMMCAB, or the CMMC Accreditation Board, they're the ones that train and certify all those trainers and practitioners and auditors. They're also in charge, of course, of which organizations actually pass the CMMC certification. The DoD defines the security requirements, okay? And then the AB, CMMCAB, they're the ones that actually implement those requirements into the framework. And where you see RP, that's who I am. I'm a registered practitioner. RPs have completed CMMC training and can serve as consultants to help organizations prepare for a certification assessment or audit. RPs have the benefit of having training directly from the CMMCAB and being up to date on the newest requirements and compliance updates. RPOs are registered practitioner organizations, and those are companies that receive a designation showing that they can help organizations seeking compliance receive remediation assistance that a single RP typically wouldn't be able to provide alone. Now, nothing is preventing organizations from self-preparing for a CMMC assessment. However, it's very easy to get lost in the weeds trying to sift through requirements and trying to interpret the legalese and technical jargon that RPs are familiar with. In the center of the page under number 7, you might see a term C3PAO. What are C3PAOs? Well, they're not to be confused with the lovable C3PO character from Star Wars. C3PAOs are the assessment organizations, okay? Those are the auditors. They will provide a primary assessor or an assessment team for a fee to tell you everything CMMC related that's wrong with you. Then you have 90 days to remediate and bridge those gaps before they come back and see if you fixed everything that they found. If so, they'll pass that certification approval to the CMMCAB for some quality assurance and see if everything passes. Then you're certified, but only for 3 years, after which you get to do it all again. The C3PAOs have to verify that every single control is met. There is no partial credit or scoring system like we were talking about with the interim rule. It is pass-fail, okay? FCI data and CUI data are 2 different types of data that could be involved in a DoD contract, okay? FCI data stands for Federal Contract Information. Any information in a contract at a minimum is FCI data, okay? And organizations with a maturity level 1 or higher can handle that FCI data. If there's any CUI, which is controlled unclassified information, you're going to need something higher than a level 1. So this information is more sensitive and may contain information like law enforcement data, tax information, health information, financial or intelligence information, unclassified nuclear info, and so on. Organizations will need to have at least a maturity level 3 to handle CUI data. Some people I've heard say in meetings or conferences or webinars that I've been a part of, they say, well, no one really has a true list of what that CUI data is. You just look for the contract to see if it requires it. Well, that's not true. You can actually go to archives.gov It's published by NARA, which is the National Archives and Records Administration. There's a full list of what all that CUI data category list is if you want to do some homework. It's pretty interesting. So to the picture. We can finally talk about this picture now, having set that stage. On the road to certification, there's a good number of steps. We start with number one, which is what we're doing right now, trying to understand CMMC at a foundational level. And then number two, trying to understand what part of your organization is in scope that would require that CMMC certification. Some organizations have segmented part of their networks, DMZ or otherwise, where part of that organization only, would need to be modified or remediated to meet that requirement. So you would find out what's in scope. And then number three, identify what maturity level you feel like you need to be at based on what kind of data that you're typically handling with the DoD. If it's CUI data, which all future contracts that require CMMC certification will indicate what level you need to be at, but without knowing that ahead of time, people are doing their best guess effort and trying to shoot for whatever level they feel like they need to be at, starting with level 1 is where most people start. And then number 4, once you understand how many technical requirements are needed based on that maturity level you're trying to aim for, you can do those pre-assessment preparations and remediations. And then number 5, resolving those compliance gaps. And of course, that's something Peters and Associates can help with as well. As Bruce mentioned, MFA and other things involved with level 1. That is our day in and day out type of work. Number 6, once you feel like you've got those gaps remediated, go find an auditor. And where do you find that auditor? At the CMMC-AB marketplace. There's a search engine there. You can search for RPs like me or auditors. And once you're ready, you find an auditor that's most likely nearby you or one that's available, and then schedule that audit. So number 7, conduct the assessment with the team. And then number 8, close those gaps within that 90-day period. And then, as I said before, number 9, the AB accreditation board does their QA. If they approve it, then ta-da, number 10, you've got your 3-year certification. Compliance management. Okay, so as I said before, there's tools that are out there that can help facilitate preparation. Compliance management tools are a great help to streamline the assessment preparation work. Peters and Associates, we use a tool from RapidFire called Compliance Manager, and as a part of the workflow, software is installed to scan and automate a huge amount of the work. What's nice is that tool collects a lot of that important evidence-related information and helps to facilitate the validation of that data through the process. Because you could enter every single PC, MAC address, IP address, and server, network device, asset information by hand, or have the scanner do it for you. And such an important element of an audit is making sure that your documentation matches up with the real world data. And that's what this tool does. It's going to match. The tool will then walk you through a step-by-step guided workflow engine through a series of questions that help address the compliance requirements. So as you progress through the tasks, you will see the progress that the tool feeds you through, and you can assign certain tasks to certain individuals with role-based control. It's a collaborative architecture. That means you're not doing it all yourself. You can define roles and contacts to assign tasks and notify individuals or third parties of the progress. You can invite a coworker to help complete some details if need be as a subject matter expert role without needing to give them full control of the entire compliance manager product. And at the end, the tool should generate records of evidence and records for evidence of compliance. You'll see a list here as an example of different maturity level controls that you're working to comply with, and it will report compliance wins in addition to compliance gaps. And that's the whole idea, right? To find those gaps before the auditor does. Calling in a C3PA and paying them, it has a cost. No one wants to go through that audit multiple times, right? So if you can find those gaps early and remediate those early, you can save yourself a ton of headaches later. So what types of things are there in level 1 that would be, requirements that you could pass or fail, and how would you fail those? Well, for example, in Active Directory, do you have it where Absolutely every blessed user is a local administrator or a domain administrator. Only domain administrator role people should be domain administrators. A fail would be obviously everyone being an admin, and it just is too much of a threat landscape. And then for passwords, making sure that devices on idle for 10 or 20 minutes actually lock. Are the passwords strong? I've noticed just from my own personal career being a network admin, walking around different manufacturing organizations where there's dedicated machines like Amada machines or metal fabrication machines attached to a PC that runs a program that helps the machine load in the files, and there is no password on it. It just slows the workers down, I'm told. Or, hey, we just turn on the button and it logs in and no one uses it. It just runs on the machine. Well, that would still be a fail. Every machine would need to have authentication. So those are just a couple of examples. Although they're foundational, sometimes organizations make exceptions without realizing, or certain IT administrations pass with some tribal knowledge built in, where the next generation of folks come in and don't realize what's still lingering out there. So something to stay on top of, certainly. So how can Peters and Associates help? Well, we have a fixed fee offering to help organizations with CMMC assessment preparations. This is a guidance role where I can help clarify the requirements and interpret the jargon and explain what acceptable evidence would be for the controls. And since we would own and manage the compliance manager tool for the customers, we would provide them with access to that tool and facilitate the evidence gathering component with the customized CMMC web portal. At the end of the engagement, customers would have CMMC compliance documentation and understand where any gaps might exist and how to address them. And with that document as well, we would be able to also help guide where Peters and Associates can remediate those as well and facilitate. So for next steps, I can speak to any interested companies or parties to further explain our process and get you on the road to certification. In the meantime, I believe we have a certain amount of time for questions if people have any. And if I don't have the answers handy, I'll take them down and provide responses after the call.
Joe, I've got a question for you in queue. There's a question out there about the ability to hold maybe more than one certification, maybe a level 1 for the FCI data and a level 3, and maybe it's a level 3, enclave of people or data repositories for the CUI data. Is that possible to have 2 certifications?
Good question. The way that the CMMC Accreditation Board views an organization is only one certification. So any higher certification that an organization may achieve over time, that is your identity. So you're not seen as a level 1 and a level 2 and a level 3. You are seen as a level 3 because if you see a contract and it says level 1 required, that doesn't mean that you need anything additional. With level 3, it already incorporates anything underneath it, which would include 1 and 2. So a level 3 organization would be able to participate and bid on and be awarded a level 1 contract without needing to identify themselves as a 1, 2, and a 3 and so forth.
Great, I think that provides good qualification. I've got a couple more questions in queue. I guess another comment I was thinking was, at the end of the day, obviously we're technologists, our firm, and so the compliance standard is kind of a way of organizing efforts around, some of these technologies that need to get implemented, right? We've been screaming from the hilltops for years about implementing MFA and having security awareness programs, not because we're just flying off on the hot seat, right? We think these are good ideas to protect data, and now along comes the hammer, I'll call it, which is the CMMC or other compliance standards that you might be mandated for. Cybersecurity insurance is really driving a lot of people to provide good behaviors, I guess, and provide a lot of protections because insurance mandates that you have certain controls in place before they'll insure you or raise your rates even higher. So just some thoughts and commentary around that. So another question for you, Joe. How do we process MFA for admin logins? And I think take some liberties in how you want to address that.
Sure. I would ask what you mean by process. Does that mean how does a compliance manager tool identify that, or which CMMC level refers to that or requires that? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm trying to interpret it myself. Maybe we'll get some clarification in there in another question. But why don't you talk about? Well, I guess what I've seen on the cybersecurity insurance part is obviously depends on the question that's asked. But oftentimes the question is, do you employ MFA for administrator logins? It's just plain and simple. And you want to answer yes, but then you realize, I only have MFA on my Office 365. I don't have it on my domain credentials on Active Directory. And that's where you go, all right, I guess there's no partial. And so I think maybe that's the spirit under which I would answer that too, Joe, for CMMC. Do you know what the language is specifically? And is an MFA item actually a level 1 type question?
Gotcha. Yes. When it comes to administrative access, multi-factor authentication is a requirement. And so that would pertain to Active Directory, not just within the cloud, but also on premises as well. So that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to involve a mobile device or a phone number or SMS, but some kind of a second step, right? Some multi-factor authentication that has more than just username password.
And I'll add color on that. I think more recently, because of our need, well, I guess the early days of our MFA implementation specifically always used Microsoft technology because oftentimes people own that technology. Microsoft has less capability to implement for on-prem against Active Directories or let's say localized applications. And so we've been leveraging another product from Cisco to employ multi-factor authentication, sometimes using Readiness server, sometimes without the need, but to employ MFA across apps, Active Directory logons, and so forth.
Right, and I will say this as well. I've seen it where some people are trying to skirt around that requirement by saying, hey, if I want to log into a VM server, I need to log into my local PC first with credentials, and then there's a separate layer with additional credential prompts to get into the VMware environment. Is that MFA? Well, it's multiple layers of single layer logins. I wouldn't call it multi-factor. So I kind of ran into that as I was helping people with PCI. And if PCI auditors are making that distinction, then certainly CMMC auditors will as well.
And similarly, a lot of people think of the camera technology or even the capability to not have to type in your password on a Windows 10 device that might have a camera that's looking at your face as an example. And that actually is a password replacement technology, not a password. So it definitely validates that it's you, but it's not a second factor. It's in fact just replacing the need to type in a password. So a lot of people get that confused too. So a little bit of a deep dive on MFA, but I think it's a very important technology. And as you mentioned, one of the 17 controls. I'll just ask this question. I don't see it out there, but I think, can you give us 2 or 3 other examples of things that are in the lowest level, or what you called the foundational level for CMMC level 1? Yes. MFA, we clearly have demonstrated, is one of the areas. Give us 2 or 3 more.
Yes, I want to bring this one up too, just because it's a different type. Not everything is technical. One of the things would be physical access, and that goes beyond, is there a lock on the door? Does it get locked during the day, and where not just any visitor can have access, free reign to the entire location? Is there someone that would be escorting them? And on top of that, is there a visitor log? So another one would be, if people come in, are they required to sign in and sign out? Because if there is a problem, and someone says, well, who was here today? That wasn't an employee, and there is no record of it, then that's a problem. So that is additionally another requirement. In addition to good firewall rules, do you have a firewall that doesn't have complete whitelisting? right? In front of your environment? Is there an implicit any where anyone can get in, or is it an implicit deny where absolutely everything's blocked unless certain things are met, certain criteria? So those are a couple more examples.
Great. Well, Joe, I threatened everyone to that we were going to have a acronym bingo at the conclusion of this, including the C3PAO. But I guess we'll, due to time, I guess we will not have the acronym bingo. But appreciate all the guidance you provided, and I know that we'll be following up as hopefully you mentioned with a email that will point you to a site where you can download the deck, the recording. We'll also have a snippet, kind of teaser recording overview, if you will. But our goal is to, again, provide some education. We are going to continue this series of chats. We're going to continue talking about CMMC for the next 5 years, right? And we're going to do so in a webinar format every quarter for a while, right? So we're planning an event in December around this where Joe again will be our speaker. We've certainly entertained guest speakers, but we'll try to take a little bit of a different angle on it. And then we've got, I don't know, 5 to 7 blogs on CMMC at this time. A lot of discussions. I know, Joe, you had one about the interim rule. So, we're trying to provide guidance and kind of be a thought leader in this space so that you don't have to worry about that so much. You can just worry about, how do I get this implemented? But we know it's going to impact a significant number of our customers. Maybe 30% of our customers are in the manufacturing space. And within that, maybe 50% or so are going to have CMMC clauses in contracts that, hopefully does not prevent them from, navigating to that aspect of their business. So in any case, thanks for attending, everyone. And Joe, again, thanks for the great presentation, and we'll follow up with everyone at the conclusion.
Thank you, everyone.